Welcome to the Pocket. I'm your host, Scooter, and today we are doing my very first ever mock draft Monday. I'm super excited. It is going to be kind of late, but we're making it just in time. So I'm glad you guys clicked on. Rules are going to be no trades. All right, that's going to be the next one, which I'm hoping to live stream. I'll give you guys a heads up if I'm going to do that. And other than that, I'm just going to spend a little bit less time on the picks I feel are a bit more obvious just to save some time so this video doesn't get too long. Other than that, don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any of the rest of the content I have coming out before the NFL draft. And leave your thoughts in the comments. Where do you disagree? Which of these takes do you think are terrible and which of these couldn't you agree with more? So other than that, thank you for clicking on and let's get right into it. So here you can see we're on the PFF website and we got the mock draft simulator tool that they've built. It is really nice for doing these mock drafts and it's very complete and comprehensive. There's lots of information right at your fingertips. So I highly suggest you use this if you are looking for a mock draft simulator. Thanks to these guys for making this. I already did this beforehand, so I know where I'm going with all these picks. It's just going to be my analysis. So let's start things off with the number one overall pick. Now, there was a little bit more discourse earlier on in the offseason, but I think it's become pretty clear that the Titans are going to take a quarterback here. They have not made a move really in the offseason to add anyone like the Browns and the Giants have. The Browns adding Kenny Pickett, the Giants adding Jameis Winston. That's something, right? The Titans are still with Will Levis, and if they're going to take a quarterback this year, he's going to replace him. So Cam Ward is notably the best quarterback in this year's class. Shedeur Sanders, the discussion was there earlier on in the offseason, but Cam Ward's really pulled away. People have recognized his incredible improvisation skills and things like that. And he's been the undisputed number one corner or a quarterback since then. I'm sure there's a few Shedeur Sanders truthers out there, but it's been this is not a hot take here to say that Cam Ward is the best quarterback in the class, and I don't think the Titans really have any reason to mess around here. They have the number one overall pick. I don't think it's like last year where someone might be willing to move up for it, so they're going to take Cam Ward. Now this, number two overall, the Cleveland Browns, this is where the discussion really starts. As I mentioned before, they did acquire Kenny Pickett, but they still need a quarterback, much like the Titans and much like the Giants, for the future. So Shedeur Sanders is there, and a lot of people are mocking him to go here, but I have made my stance clear on Shedeur Sanders that I just don't feel he's quite worth it for these, rebuilding teams. I don't think he's going to be the guy to, put the team on his back and, perform in ways that are impossible for other quarterbacks in a sense. Like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, they perform in a way that is impossible for other guys because they simply just aren't athletic enough. I mean, Mahomes isn't like this super athlete, but the pliability and his arm strength is certainly there. He's got the baseball, Major League Baseball in his genes. So he's got that going for him. The only guy in the NFL who's really like not this incredible athlete who is that good at quarterback, in my opinion, is Joe Burrow. So that would be how you'd have to view Shedeur Sanders if he was going to be on their level and worth this pick. And to me personally, I mean, if you get a top 10 quarterback out of the number 2 or number 3 overall pick, that is great, right? Because a top 10 quarterback will last you for years, but you'll kind of be stuck in purgatory. And it's always been a philosophical thing for teams, right? Are you going to stick with a guy like that or are you not? I'm typically more on the side of I want the guy who can go toe-to-toe with the Mahomes and with the Lamars and with the Josh Allens. Of course, you would like to have the team built before that so you don't end up paying him and having holes on your roster that get exposed every year in the playoffs. Bills, Ravens, but anyway, and Bengals. But they were able to get there on the rookie contract. That's the idea. You build up the roster. And then while your elite quarterback's on a rookie contract, kind of like the Commanders are right now, you can kind of go all in and go for the Super Bowl. Other than that, you're just trying to kind of catch up. I mean, Mahomes is taking pay cuts compared to the rest of these guys. So financially, how are you supposed to get there? So in the end of the day, where I'm going with this is I don't think Shedeur Sanders is going to be able to revive the Cleveland Browns. I'm not saying he can't be a good quarterback, but the second overall pick to a team like this, I don't think so. So what does that leave the Browns to do? It leads them to take best player available. And for them, they have a need at corner and wide receiver. They did just extend Myles Garrett. A lot of people are intrigued by the idea of pairing him with Abdul Carter. I do think that would be a great idea. But Travis Hunter is a once in a generation type of player. There's only so many players in NFL history who have proven they can go both ways in college, and he wants to do it in the pros. And, there's a sense that he's going to be too small to be able to pull it off. But there's another thing that goes into that is that he has not 100% dedicated his efforts towards one position yet. And he already, to me, spoiler alert, looks like the best wide receiver in the draft class and probably the best corner. So if that's the case, then he's only going to get even more elite at it, if that's even possible, if he commits to one side of the ball. I just don't see how, if you're going best player available, you could pass up on Travis Hunter, especially when the needs line up. So Browns number 2 overall, go Travis Hunter. And now number 3 overall. Oh, man. So this thing with the Browns kind of does derive from where I started looking at this from the Giants' perspective, where I'm wondering, is Shedeur the pick if he's there? And if not, what do we do? Well, this to me is the least ideal situation for the Giants. This is where I would really like to trade down and, give another team an opportunity to pick up Shedeur Sanders or Abdul Carter. We have Brian Burns. We have Kayvon Thibodeau with a contract extension coming up at the end of next year. This would be his 5th-year option year. And so it's not ideal for you to take Abdul Carter here from like a, roster construction standpoint. You also just signed Chauncey Golston, so you have your depth guy. And it's just a really tough spot. Like I said, I'd really rather trade down. And there's discussion about guys like Mason Graham filling in that second defensive tackle spot, an actual need, right, that we do need filled. You can even see PFF agrees right here. But I'm just not that bought into the idea of a guy like Mason Graham having the same impact as a pass rusher like Abdul Carter. And this year's class is really deep through the 2nd and 3rd round with defensive tackles. I'm sure a lot of teams are going to be thinking like that and taking other positions of need earlier on like this. But I'm going to have the Giants actually go Abdul Carter, because what you can do here is, this is something we did in years past where we were actually going to Super Bowls and stuff, is you can never have enough edge rushers. You keep drafting them. They eventually want to get paid. You can keep the best of them and let the other guys go, or hopefully you can trade them away, right? So what would have to happen here in a most ideal case for the Giants is they would have to trade Kayvon either right before the draft, right after this pick, and get whatever you can for him. And I actually think he's got decent trade value. So I think it would eventually pan out. Maybe you can use like a 2nd or 3rd round pick that you get back for him and use that on a defensive tackle, right? And get them at the value, get Abdul Carter as the elite guy in there right now, pair him with Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and whatever defensive tackle you add, and you've got yourself an elite defensive line going into the season, where the offense, right, you can use a lot of the rest of the picks on the offensive side of the ball where you need help on the line, wide receiver 2, and then maybe a later round quarterback, and you've given him a much better team with a blue chip player that you're just not going to find later in the draft, like Abdul Carter. And if you're not convinced by, say, it's Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe, it's easier to move on from a guy like that than it is from a guy like Shedeur Sanders. And you're also moving on while still having a guy like Abdul Carter compared to whoever you get in the 2nd or 3rd round instead, in the case where you take Sanders. So this is where a lot of the controversy is going to be. I know. All right, a lot of you guys are going to say, you're a Giants fan. You don't want Shedeur Sanders? No, let me tell you. Let me elaborate on this for a second. I'm not saying Shedeur Sanders can't be a great quarterback. I don't think he's ever going to be like top 5 with the guys that are in the league right now. And there's a tier gap from those guys to the other next 5 guys, 6 through 10. And that's the best case scenario. And I just don't think the Giants are in a position right now, with all the pressure that's going to come along with getting a guy like Sanders. I don't think we're in a position to, have him properly grow and succeed. I just don't believe it. You could call me scarred from the last 6 years of Daniel Jones, but Daniel Jones was viewed as a very easy reach in the draft. And there's many people out there who feel Shedeur Sanders is a late 1st, maybe even an early 2nd. I don't really believe that. I think they're, not giving him enough credit for the intangible stuff, but that's how I view it. Is just, I'd rather wait another year than sign myself up for a potential 6 years of misery, right? Because we're not going to be able to support him. We missed out on adding a blue chip guy right here. This is a generation changing draft right here for the Giants, and they got to get this pick right. This is just what I would do. I'm not saying it's a awful pick to take Shedeur Sanders. You just really got to nail the rest of your draft picks. And, I'm not super confident with the way things have been going that we can manage to do that for him. So Abdul Carter goes number 3 to the Giants. They move off of Kayvon Thibodeau, or they just have a filthy 3-man rotation for the year, maybe even 4 with Chauncey Golston. All right, up next, we have the New England Patriots. And for quite a while here, I was looking at Ted McMillan and thinking, oh, this is easy. They really need a wide receiver. They took him too low last year, and that really killed them. None of them really hit for Drake May, but the offensive line is also a big issue for them. It can help the run game too if you get a guy like that. And I've just fallen off on some of the hype with Tutoria McMillan. He hates being called Tet, by the way, so I don't call him that. But it's just I'm not quite convinced that he's like this Mike Evans prospect that everyone thinks he is. I'll get into it more when we talk about the my top ranked wide receivers. I have gotten a little bit through it. I'm not done yet, but I have seen all of them play, and it's just he's not Mike Evans. That's not what I view him as. So we're gonna go best offensive lineman available here. Will Campbell's right there, very versatile player, and from this point, it's pretty straightforward. It was in my eyes, this is either Tet McMillan or Will Campbell. They've invested a lot into the defense. They need to help out Drake May. Get yourself an offensive lineman. Can't go wrong doing that. Moving on to the Jaguars. And there's some discussion here. I've heard people compare to Toria McMillan, or T-Mac as he likes to be called, to Mike Evans in the Liam Cohen offense. But I'm just not like, I feel like you already have Brian Thomas Jr. as that vertical threat. And you have a lot of other needs on this team. Like, this defense is really bad. You moved off of Evan Ingram, who wasn't really a true tight end, but they need tight end as well. They need safety. So they should be looking best player available here on that, in those positions of need. And you could argue it's T-Mac, but I'm going to go Mason Graham. We discussed him in the for the Giants. That would also be a filthy defensive line: Kayvon, Graham, Dexter Lawrence, and Burns. But for here, this Jaguars team has been investing into this defensive line with guys like Josh Allen, Hines, Trayvon Walker. Pretty sure they signed Eric Armstead like last year, and that really didn't work out. So they really need to get this right, because in this AFC South, the Colts, their heavy running team, the Texans, they have Mixon, and they ran the ball pretty effectively for a portion of last year. And it's just going to be something they're going to need if they want to compete in this division. Even the Titans back in the day had a much better run game. It was not good last year. The whole offense was bad. But you understand where I'm going with this. Mason Graham, one of the few blue chip players left. Him, Genty, and I would say Tyler Warren. You can maybe argue Starks and Campbell. But yeah, I would say he's a blue chip player at a position of need. It's really hard to miss here. And I would just take him and secure that run defense that's been a problem for them for so long. Moving on to number 6, Ashton Genty. This is a very easy one for me to the Raiders. They need a running back. Their running back group was very bad last year. Their offensive line is pretty good, so they're ready to take advantage of a good running back. And, you know, they do need wide receiver as well. They do need interior D-line, like I said, and corner. But I think those defensive positions will definitely be there early second, or they could trade up into the bottom of the first if they really feel like they like a guy. And then wide receiver and running back, that means we're just comparing Genty and T-Mac here. I just feel like Genty is far more elite at his own position and has a much more rare skill set than T-Mac does. And Pete Carroll, the identity he's going to want to establish with his team, remember, you got Brock Bowers, you got this offensive line, Geno Smith, and Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, wide receivers. Okay, there's guys you can get, like I said, later in the second round that are still going to be of value. But I don't feel like you're going to find an Ashton Genty down there. Although you could argue, this is deep at running back too. They could find a guy like this in the second round. But I think later in this draft, like late in the first round, some running backs are going to start flying off the board. So either way, I think he loves the idea of having a physical guy who can, get him 5 yards a pop, just like Marshawn Lynch did back in those Seattle days. And I love Ashton Genty here at 6 to the Raiders. Now, coming up next, we got the New York Jets, and this is a pick that I was very locked into before, but it got a little confusing once I decided not to draft T-Mac to the Patriots. They need a wide receiver, and they need a tight end, and obviously some people are going to say they need quarterback, but I say you're good right now with Fields. No need to, take a guy like Sanders here. And the defensive interior line, Mason Graham is gone. So what are you going to do here? Well, that to me, once again, means you're looking at T-Mac and Tyler Warren. Now, Tyler Warren, if you haven't seen this guy play, oh my God, he looks like a bigger, stronger Travis Kelce in college. The way he moves is so fluid. He's also so hard to tackle. And like I said, he's so strong too. There's just I don't have a bad thing to say about him. And it's not like, oh, he's a jack of all trades. Like, no, he is great. He is great at everything in the receiving game. I haven't seen as much of the run blocking, but it doesn't look like it's going to be an issue for a guy of his size. I mean, 6'6", 261. I'm pretty sure he measured up a little bit differently at the combine, but that's just the size profile that he gives off. And I feel like for a guy like Fields, who's had a lot of trouble reading defenses and going through his progressions, I think having a security blanket at tight end, who you're really confident in, kind of reminds me of Cole Kmet when he was in Chicago. I think would be a really, really good thing for Justin Fields to have. Not to mention, you keep tight ends on the field when you're in those 12 personnel packages or those, running packages where you use Justin Fields in read option and things like that. And I just think it's a player that's always going to be on the field, kind of like Brock Bowers, except he might even be a little bit more versatile. You never know. It's going to be tough. We've seen lots of elite tight end prospects come out over the last few years. Kyle Pitts, Brock Bowers, Tyler Warren, all very different, but only Brock Bowers has hit so far. I blame the Falcons because if the Raiders can make it work, then the Falcons should be able to. But either way, yeah, I'm going to take Tyler Warren here to the Jets. They get the last remaining, clear-cut blue-chip prospect in Tyler Warren, safety blanket for Justin Fields. Could be a Hall of Famer. You never know. We're going to say that about a lot of these guys, Travis Hunter, Cam Ward's his name might be in there if, you really like him. And Abdul Carter looks very, very good and Genty, but Mason Graham, defensive tackle. But yes, I will have Tyler Warren going here to the Jets. I mocked them Brock Bowers last year, and they didn't do it. They took Olu Fashanu in a year as a basically depth offensive lineman, which was smart in one end. But if you really wanted to go for it, I would have probably went for the guy who's going to give you the immediate impact. And I think they're going to mend that mistake here and help out Fields. All right, now, here we have the Panthers at number 8. And typically I've had them mocked wide receiver, but I've had that either, try to have them reach down the board. Luther Burden is there. I do like him, but I think he's still going to be viewed in the bunch of guys in the lower first round. So I wouldn't think it would be smart to take him here. You'd want to trade down to do that. But in this case, T-Mac is here at 8, where typically he was not. I debated about the edge guys here and the corners, Jahdae Barron, Mike Green, and Shamar Stewart. James Pierce Jr., there's a ton of options they have here, but I think you really want to prioritize the young quarterback. Armand Membu might be a good pick too, but their offensive line definitely improved a lot last year. I think, between Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette, let's get a really strong, reliable wide receiver prospect, which is much more what I view T-Mac as, not like this. He's great in the jump ball game, don't get me wrong, but I view him a lot more as like actually having potential in the slot, kind of like a Michael Pittman or something like that, like a big slot guy. So he's going to be a nice tall target for Bryce Young to throw to. Won't have trouble seeing him going down the field, being as short as he is. But yeah, I think it's going to be a nice piece to add to this offense, and they shouldn't have to worry about wide receiver anymore. I mean, you got Legette at the X, you got Coker and T-Mac, who you can kind of rotate in and out of the outside in the slot. And I think that's a good cast of weapons for this Panthers team. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints. A lot of these teams have had potential needs on the defensive side, and I've passed since the Jaguars and the Giants and technically the Browns. But this is a defensive-heavy draft, and I feel like with the exception of a few of the next few picks, there's going to be a lot of defensive players going in this stretch right here. So the Saints, they are in probably the worst situation, if you ask me, when it comes to like cap situation and, just the actual players they have on their team. It's like you're spending all this money and you're in debt, but you're still not good. Like, I can't think of a much worse situation. They're getting old on the defensive side. Guys like Cam Jordan still coming back to play, but I think you got to find the eventual replacement for him. And they run that 4-3 scheme for so long that I really like what has actually been a common mock to them, and that is Michael Williams. Although it's going to be viewed as a reach by PFF and probably some other people. You look at the frame, and you could see why they would like a guy like this. They typically take guys like this because they are good for the 4-3 scheme. 6'5", 265. That is not just some, bendy pass rusher. That is a big run defending, high potential for development defensive end. They've taken guys like this in the past. Like I've said, they have not hit on them, but they're not going to have to trade up for Michael Williams. He's going to be right there. You could argue a guy like Shamar Stewart would make more sense. James Pierce Jr. and Mike Green, probably better pure pass rushers along with Donovan Eziraku. And I just think this is the right fit. He's going to replace Cam Jordan. You got to keep up with the run defense, not just the pass rush. And you never know that both of them might be able to help being on the field in the same season, as long as Cam Jordan doesn't just randomly decide to retire. And it could actually improve this defense quite significantly. So I have Michael Williams going at 9 to the Saints. A little bit away from like what I would do, but I just think, if this is the scheme that they're going to roll with and they really like taking their guys there, they can have them. So now here we are at the Bears at pick 10. And this is like also a situation where it's like, this is something that I think they're going to do, but it doesn't mean I disagree with it. You see the players that are left on the board. You got some wide receivers like Luther Burden, some corners, and some edge guys. Jahad Campbell's like an elite linebacker. Same with Starks for safety. But they've invested into the offensive line to the point that people probably think they're going to be done. But you got to remember, this is Ben Johnson coming over from the Lions. You got to remember where they started was the offensive line. If they're thinking, like I'm thinking, they're not worried about addressing anything else until they're convinced this offensive line can be top 10 heading into this season. Or, that's the hope you're going to have. It's probably, not realistically going to happen. But with the optimism, you're like, yeah, we're going to have a great unit. And they still have a, potential hole in Braxton Jones, someone they're not super confident in, someone this regime did not bring in themselves. So I think Armand Membu, being as powerful as he is, you go here and you look, he's over 315 pounds just about, but he's a very, very strong for his size too, a great mover, and he's only 21 years old. So he's a great prospect, and I think someone Ben Johnson would like to have for a long time, being as young as he is, and being able to develop him into this scheme. A lot of people are viewing guys like Amari and Hampton potentially getting taken here, kind of like when they took Gibbs super early. He was viewed as like a low first, and they took him at 12, I believe it was, and it was just shocking. But I think there is going to be running backs in the second round that they can pick up because they're picking high enough in the second round. And they're not going to have if Ashton Genty was here, they're going to just take him no matter what. But the Raiders took him, so they can't really think the same way they did about this, and they end up going with Armand Membu. Moving on to our next team, we have the San Francisco 49ers, and if you saw the thumbnail, you will probably have been waiting for this pick. Shedeur Sanders falls to pick 11. The 49ers have a ton of needs. They just cleaned house. They also are dealing with this Brock Purdy situation. He wants his contract extension, and he is asking for all of it, up to $60 million. Now, I've probably built a bit of a reputation at this point for not giving quarterbacks quite as much credit as some other people do, because I will point out how much support they have around them. Over the past 2 or 3 years, greatest examples of this is Jared Goff and the Lions. Great offensive line, great cast of weapons. The Eagles, Jalen Hurts, great offensive line, great cast of weapons. And also the play calling with Ben Johnson over with the Lions. And Jalen Hurts didn't have it last year, but he had Kellen Moore, who did a pretty good job this year. I wouldn't say that was, the elite part of it. And then before that, he had Shane Steichen before that, off year that they had. And the same goes for Brock Purdy. Being on the 49ers, we've seen guys like Jimmy Garoppolo make it to the NFC Championship, even to the Super Bowl, within striking distance of winning and not get it done. And, people want to blame other players on the team, on the defense. They want to blame the Chiefs' devil magic. But I'm really going to say, if you had a Josh Allen or a Lamar, obviously, on that team, they would have won the game very easily. But even if you have a guy like kind of halfway through, I feel like Geno Smith is better than Brock Purdy. I feel like if he was on the 49ers, he probably would have given them a better chance to win. A guy like Dak Prescott, someone I didn't give credit to early on, has developed into that passer at this point. And so I want to put Shedeur Sanders in that situation. I feel like this is a really big win-win for both teams, and maybe all of the manipulation by Deion Sanders to his own son's draft value was out of love because he doesn't want him going to the Giants. He doesn't want him going to the Browns, and he doesn't want him going to the Titans. Not the Jets, not the Raiders, none of these teams, not the Saints, but the 49ers with Kyle Shanahan. If I want to give my son the best chance to succeed, I'm going to put him with the best offensive mind, maybe besides Andy Reid, but Andy Reid does have Mahomes in the NFL. And I think this makes a lot of sense, and now I get it. They have a ton of needs that they need to fill. offensive line, defensive line. They're not the same team they used to be. But I don't feel like they're that far off. Like I said, they just cleaned house. They've spent resources. They have this draft, and they've typically drafted well, with the exception of, the past like kind of 2 years. It hasn't been quite as good since they've been making it to the Super Bowl. The picks have been lower, but they have a chance to make a huge splash here and say, you know what, Brock, you're asking for $60 million. You're not, on the same level as Lamar and Josh Allen. Take a pay cut, or we're going to draft your replacement. And if he doesn't do it by then, I think they do what they give him the Brandon Ayuk treatment, drafting Ricky Pearsall. Here you go. We're drafting your replacement. You want to get paid $60 million? You're going to have to beat this guy out. And at that point, the relationship's probably ruined, and they would just stick with Shedeur Sanders, and Brock would want to leave or get traded. So here at 11, I have Shedeur Sanders going here. And not to mention also the scheme fit. Shedeur Sanders, kind of like the point guard type of quarterback, not the biggest guy, but has some improv skills and great release. Obviously very smart and been around football for such a long time. I think this is a great fit for both sides. And although it's a little, I think Shedeur, I've said 15 to 20. I don't think this is far off from that. I don't think it's a reach. And considering the 49ers probably aren't going to be in a position to draft a quarterback like this, in the next few years, since they consistently are, this is their worst season they've had in years. They're picking at 11. They got to take advantage of it. Shedeur falls, and they scoop him up. Now, moving on to our next pick, at pick 12, we have the Dallas Cowboys, a team that often could not get past the 49ers over the past few years. And they have a lot of needs, but the biggest ones have always been linked to the run defense. They have a big need at edge now, losing DeMarcus Lawrence. And they've also had a big need at interior defensive tackle, just a pure run stopper for a long time. So for me, this is pretty simple. It's Kenneth Grant or it's defensive end. And, it kind of goes back to what I said about the other defensive tackles that could have gotten taken higher after Mason Graham. And for the teams that elected to go with other premium positions like edge or wide receiver or a blue chip tight end, I just feel like at this point, there are still enough edge guys that you can still kind of help out your run game because they all have different skill sets. If it was just Donovan Ezraku and what's his face, Mike Green, I wouldn't be as confident. You're getting a pure pass rusher in there, but Mike is kind of a pure pass rusher. You need someone who's really, really good against the run too, and that's Shamar Stewart. You can see here, this dude is a monster. 6'6", 290. I don't think that's right. I'm pretty sure he's closer to 280 or 275, but he's a bit of that 4-eye, kind of like that Chauncey Golston build, but obviously he's a lot more skilled coming out. And I think this kind of kills two birds with one stone. You might not be getting the most elite, refined pass rusher out of this group, but you already have Micah Parsons. You need to help out your run defense. This defense is way too lopsided against the pass, and they were losing corners and stuff too in free agency this year, so they've still got more work to do, but I think this is a great start to balancing out this defensive line. And Shamar Stewart kind of, reminding me of that bigger DeMarcus Lawrence, that huge build, great against the run. And I just think this is a good pick for the Cowboys. This is what I would do. Shamar Stewart. Up next, we got the Miami Dolphins. And I cannot wait to make this pick. I watched the Dolphins a lot last year, especially having Achane on my team. He was so fun to have, except when Tua was hurt. But even beyond that, just the Dolphins' offensive line has bothered me for so many years. Mike McDaniel's scheme with all the misdirection to, horizontally really throws off defenders and keeps them on their heels, allowing the Dolphins' offensive line to get a head start sort of on their blocks. And that's been helping them. But when your line is still not working, even with all of that help, that's an issue. And you know what? Just imagine how great this offense would be if you had a great offensive line and all of that misdirection. I've been a Tua, not a hater. I've grown to appreciate what he does for their offense from an awareness standpoint and IQ, but I just think, I don't love the ceiling. And it's kind of how I view Shedeur Sanders. Like, Tua does everything right for the most part. Yeah, he makes some boneheaded throws, but it's usually when he's throwing with anticipation, trying to do something good. But if you actually want to try to win a Super Bowl with Tua, you guys can't win in the cold. You need to build up this offensive line. So let's go ahead and pick up Kelvin Banks Jr., who is also a good scheme fit due to the way that he moves in. He's very mobile, even at his size of 6'4", 320. And although Armand Membu would have been a good scheme fit too, I would be glad here to get Kelvin Banks Jr. Moving on to the Indianapolis Colts. Now, they would have really liked Tyler Warren. Their tight ends combined for like 14 something catches last year. And that's listed as their top need. But Tyler Warren's gone. There's some hype around Colston Loveland, but I don't think a receiving tight end is worth the 14th overall pick unless if, he's going to be like a Travis Kelce throughout his career or, something close to that. And although, there's other tight ends in this draft that they could pick up, I just think that's just not what you want to do right here. You have other needs, and there's other blue chip players who are available. Back with the Colts. So let's look at the guys who are still here. They have a need at safety. They have a need at linebacker. They have a need at edge. They need all these things. They did lose Will Fries in free agency, so that stinks. But no guard is, valued this highly. You have a bunch of really good defensive players sitting right here, and they could go edge, but I feel like their issue is, they just drafted Latu last year. I think you need to kind of spread the love here on the defense. Their biggest problem last year was tackling. They made a bunch of additions in the secondary, but they still have a big hole at linebacker. And Jahad Campbell has been sliding down the board just because no one's really had a need for linebacker so far. And although there's other teams, in a few picks that I think would really, really like Jahad Campbell, I'm going to have the Colts go ahead and take him right here to be that lockdown. Go back to those Darius Leonard days or Shaq Leonard where, he was forcing turnovers and always flying to the ball. And even if someone missed a tackle, he'd be the first one there to make up for it. So I think this would be a great pick here for the Colts to help, tie up their defense. Moving on to the Falcons, who were just sweating bullets, praying that the Colts did not go ahead and take their guy. The only question is, who is their guy? They got needs at, it says wide receiver and corner, but the needs are all over the defensive side here. They could have been candidates for Jahad Campbell, but he's gone now. You're left with just these edge rushers. Mike Green and James Pierce Jr. probably have the highest upside, where, Ezraku and Nick Scorn, all the way down here, are a bit of that shorter, high leverage type of pass rusher. But just looking at Mike Green and comparing him 6'4", 248 to James Pierce Jr. James Pierce Jr. has been knocked for these like character issues, but there's lots of people who say they really don't know what people are talking about. So there is that. That's probably why he's, below a guy like Mike Green, because Mike Green's he's got a history too, not as recently, as like before, he was at Marshall, but excuse me, they both have a history. So to me, this is really, pick either one. They're very similar, very athletic speed rushers, but I'm just going to go with James Pierce Jr. Proving it at Tennessee, just a little bit more impressive than Marshall, but he's also kind of viewed as the top edge rusher when you kind of take away the character flaws. So I think the Falcons really, really need help there, and I wouldn't be afraid to go ahead and take a risk and take a guy like James Pierce Jr. there. Moving on to our next team, the Arizona Cardinals. Now, they need corner, they need interior defensive line, but more specifically like a nose guard, and then they need interior offensive line. Now, you could look at Tyler Booker here, but I don't think it's as desperate as a need for them where they feel like they have to take it. I feel like they really want to get this defense where Jonathan Gannon wants it. And there are still all these defensive tackles that people have been electing to pass on. Guys like Walter Nolan, Derek Harmon, one of the true defensive, one of the true nose guard types, looking at him 330 or 310. It says 310. Who was it? It was 330. It was someone else besides Kenneth Grant, but Kenneth Grant is the guy you want here. The big run stuffing defensive tackle who's going to help tie in that defense. They have a lot of tweener guys on the edge, Darius Robinson for the 3-tech or the 4-eye. And Jonathan Gannon, if he wants to use all of these tweeners and these twists and these creative blitzes and defensive schemes, then he's going to need a guy who's just going to do the simple work and stuff the run, something they're going to have to be able to do in the NFC. Kenneth Grant is a great player, and he's going to be on their team for years as a cornerstone. And at the 16th overall pick, that's pretty great value. Now, the Bengals, they were probably looking at the same thing, but they also could have a potential need at edge here. And I don't know what's going to happen with the Trey Hendrickson situation. I don't even know if he's still going to be holding out through the draft and all that stuff. Oh my God, what a nightmare it would be. But a great way to resolve that nightmare, take a page out of the 49ers book, just draft his replacement, trade him away, whatever you got to do. and move on, right? You can't afford him. Okay, spend your picks on defense. I mean, if you sign him, the amount of money you're going to have allocated to 4 or 5 players, Higgins, Chase, Burrow, BJ Hill is going to be like pretty crazy. So eventually you're going to have to spread it out. It's going to have to be on the defensive side. You move on from Trey Hendrickson, you add Mike Green, another high upside pass rusher. Now here, I've been waiting to make this pick too, number 18, Seattle Seahawks. For quite a while, you see they have center and guard as their main needs and then edge. Now, there are edge rushers here, but I think they're going to be a little desperate for this. This is what I would do. Looking at the Seahawks offensive line, you don't even have to go back that far to like the middle of Russell Wilson's career in Seattle after the Super Bowls. This offensive line completely fell apart, and it has been an issue to this day for Geno Smith, and it's going to be an issue for Sam Darnold, who we saw what the difference was when there's interior pass rush. He's a completely different guy. So you just have to secure his protection. Tyler Booker ranked very lowly by PFF. Some other people view him as a first-round pick. I'm going to take him here for the Seattle Seahawks. Get the best guard in the class. Alabama guy, it's going to be kind of hard to miss. He won't be terrible, but like I said, a lot of people are a lot more confident in him. 6'5", 325 is good size and athleticism, so definitely going to be a better future at the very least for Sam Darnold and the Seahawks. Now, Tampa Bay Buccaneers at pick 19, they were waiting for Jahad Campbell, but they cannot trade in this mock draft. So they have to just sit here. And now they're left with needs at edge, linebacker, and just DB, right? Corner, safety. And to me, I looked at a lot of things here. I looked at potentially guys like Jalen Walker, but he's kind of more of an edge rushing tweener. So at linebacker and edge, it could make sense. But they did sign a guy who's very similar to that, and Hassan Reddick. So I'm not thinking he is the pick here. You could go with some of the other later rated guys like Nick Scorn, like I said before, with Donovan Ezraku. But I do think it is about time for these corners to start going off the board, and they have a specific corner that they like. Jahdae Barron is rated higher than Will Johnson, but Will Johnson is that big physical corner, kind of like Carlton Davis, who is no longer on the team, and he is kind of the guy that they would use to match up with like an A.J. Brown, and I think they're going to want a guy like that back on the defense, so go ahead and get Will Johnson and add him to this defense and keep the roster strong. I don't view them as a team that has a ton of needs, so just adding one of the best players available in the draft at a position of need is very lucky. Now, moving on. This is a pick I've had locked in for so long that I'm getting bored of talking about, but we're going to go back over it. Omarion Hampton here at 20 to the Broncos. There is a chance that they could get a guy of similar caliber later in the third round, maybe a Cam Scatterbo or something like that. But I say get Hampton right now. I don't think he's I think there is a tier gap between guys like him and Genty, but there's a chance I could be completely wrong. I mean, Hampton has the prototypical size to not just be, a power back, but also work in the receiving game. He's a very fluid athlete, especially at his size. He is 6 foot 220 or 215, so he is a monster and really hard to tackle. Having a guy like this who you can check the ball down to in the Sean Payton offense with Bo Nix, I think is really, really good thing to have. That way, when he's on the field, the team can't really guess whether you're running or passing. Whereas if you have Audric Estime in, they're going to know you're running. And if you have Julio McLaughlin in, they're going to know you're passing. So less telling to the defense, more confusion. Think back to the days of Sean Payton having a guy like Alvin Kamara, except instead of Kamara, it's going to be a guy a lot more like Joe Mixon. So I really like this pick here for the Broncos. I don't think any of the wide receivers are as big of a difference maker as he's going to be for, the whole running back unit. These wide receivers are still going to be competing with the likes of a Marvin Mims, a Cortland Sutton, and Troy Franklin for snaps, and it's just going to be tougher for them to have that immediate impact. And this Broncos team, I don't think is too far off. I mean, this defense is ready, so you just need an instant upgrade. That's the time that you go for running back. You're on this rookie contract with him to go all in, trade for a wide receiver or something like that. And this to me is a no-brainer. It's either your favorite running back or Omarion Hampton. Now moving on to 21. This is the other team besides the Steelers that, besides the 49ers, that if I saw Shador Sanders fall to 21, I would have the Steelers take him. They don't have anyone right now. They had Fields and Russell Wilson last year, and it looked promising, but in the end, it did not work out. So what are the Steelers going to do here? Well, they do have other needs. The biggest one of that being actually, I would say you have Keanu Benton and Cam Ward as like the three techs, but they really need a nose guard. This defense is getting old, and they are desperate for help just in general. How do they raise the floor of this team? They were getting run over by teams like the Bills, couldn't keep up with the Ravens anymore. And you saw things fell apart at the end of the year. So, as I mentioned before, there is some nose guard types in this class, and Derek Harmon is going to be the next one. I'm pretty sure it said on his combine profile that he was 330. Here it says he's 310. But he is a nose guard, and I think that's just going to be a plug and play. He's just going to get right in there. You're going to be able to have 5 down linemen if you include the outside linebackers, edge rushers inside of that, and you're going to be able to do a much better job stopping the run. Of course, you have needs at in the secondary, but you can also address those later in the draft. Now, for the Chargers, this is a pick I had a little bit of fun with. Now, there's not a lot of agreement on the wide receivers in this year's draft. Many of them are like, especially after T-Mac kind of mixed around for even that number 2 spot, if you're not including Travis Hunter, who I actually think is the best. And that means that it's going to be really hard to tell who's going to go. So I really tried to go with scheme fit here. For the Chargers, I am taking a wide receiver. There's no tight end besides maybe Colston Loveland available for them. I mean, that is an option, but I would just say go for the upside. For your quarterback, you can get a tight end in the 2nd or 3rd round if that's what you really want. But I want to add an explosive element to this offense again. They lost Josh Palmer. Why not get the guy who ran the fastest 40 in the draft and shows good run after catch skills in Matthew Golden? Take advantage of Justin Herbert's strong arm and add another explosive element to this offense. I mean, you're going to have Ladd, who is also fast in the slot, and you're going to have Matthew Golden screeching down the field after, pounding the rock over and over and over with this Jim Harbaugh philosophy. If you're going to run the ball, you got to be able to throw it over the top. And Matthew Golden is going to help the Chargers do it, and Justin Herbert is going to be perfect for it. So I could have gone with a lot of guys here. I happen to go with Matthew Golden. They already have a slot wide receiver. They needed someone on the perimeter. Luther Burden would have been a great option here too, but I just think with the speed, Matthew Golden. Moving on to our next team, the Green Bay Packers. Now, wide receiver is going to be one of their needs, but I think they're going to focus on the defensive side. Last year, when their offense fell apart, it was because all their wide receivers got hurt, not because, they don't have any. So I'm not going to say they're going to, immediately panic and attack that with their 1st-round pick. They do need help on this defense still. And you look at your biggest competition in the NFC, not even just the Eagles, the Lions, the Vikings, all these teams, even the Commanders, they all like to run the ball. The Buccaneers, they all like to run the ball. So if you're going to compete in the playoffs, you're going to have to be able to stop them from doing that. So once again, we're going to go defensive tackle, except unlike the Steelers, we don't need to worry as much about whether he's a 3-tech or a nose guard. I think you just kind of need the best guy here to really cause disruption, because this is a very talented Packers defensive line, and you could probably mix these guys around on the formation. And so I think Walter Nolan, this is the perfect spot for him. There's plenty of spots he could have gone before, like say to the Bengals, maybe the Broncos, but or the Steelers, but I don't really see it. Maybe the Chargers, but I think he ends up falling to here. So Walter Nolan goes at pick 23 to the Green Bay Packers, help stopping guys, like I said, like Saquon Barkley in the Eagles offense. Also, he's going to be able to bring an interior pass rush and, have an effect on some of the opposing quarterbacks as well. He's a really, really good player, probably actually overall better than guys like Derek Harmon. I don't know about Kenneth Grant. It might be kind of close, but, Derek Harmon is more of a nose guard. He's got to develop the skill set that Walter Nolan has for his pass rushing, because Nolan is really athletic on the field. Moving on to our next team, the Minnesota Vikings. And some of you guys are probably looking at Malachi Starks and Jahdae Barron and saying, what are you doing? Why aren't you taking these guys? Well, Jahdae Barron's a guy that people have mixed opinions about. They feel like he might need to be a slot corner. Not too sure yet. I haven't completely dove into, the defensive backs and the defensive players in this draft, but I am familiar with them. And I just feel like the corners, they aren't going to be as valued as the guys in the trenches in this year's class. Also, safety, kind of like running back, typically doesn't get valued. A guy like Hampton, who's actually probably one of the top 15 players in this draft, this might even be considered early, having him go at 20. So, same thing with safety. But the Vikings re-signed Harrison Smith to a 1-year deal, but they're going to need a replacement for him. And they run a lot of safeties in their defense anyway with Brian Flores. So I think this is a perfect spot for Malachi Starks. They did a lot of work in the offensive line and in the trenches. So I think this is a very natural pick for them here. And I'm not the only one saying this. And like I said, this is a pretty common mock pick right here. Up next, we have the Houston Texans. Now, they need offensive line and nothing else. I don't care that they looked really bad without Nico, Diggs, and Tank Dell last year. That's like with the Packers. It's just unlikely to happen again. Now, Dell is coming back, and they will have to do something probably later in the draft, but you can't do anything if the offensive line isn't there. So looking at who's available, you got Josh Simmons, who suffered a season-ending injury. And even though he's great, you need this guy to start right away. So unfortunately, they're not going to be able to take a guy and sort of develop him and get him in there when he's ready. Josh Connerly, also probably the next tackle that you would take if you're afraid of the injury. But Greg Zabel, he's listed as a tackle here, but he can really play pretty much any position on the offensive line. And there's a lot of hype around Greg Zabel. There's some people who think he's way better than everyone else. But I just think, this is probably, if someone might be high on him and, reach on him in the draft. But I think this is a good spot for him too. You need offensive line. You need a guy who can play right now and maybe even play anywhere. So I think Greg Zabel is a great pick here. Moving on to the Los Angeles Rams. Now, this is going to be a very straightforward one. Much like some of the other NFC competing teams, they need to stop the Eagles and these other teams that love to run the ball. They're also, piling their resources into the trenches even further, and you need to keep up. And you're already behind in the run defense department. Now, I would have really loved a guy like Jahad Campbell here, but he's not going to be there. They added Braden Fisk as a defensive tackle, but he's definitely a pass rushing specialist. He's not good against the run. They added Jared Verse, who's pretty good at both, but I think they need that nose guard. I've been talking about a lot of teams needing nose guards. Yeah, it's important. It's not the same as 3-tech. You can't just put a guy there and expect them to, soak up double teams the same way that a 350-pound guy does, right? I mean, Alfred Collins is all the way down here, but 6'5", 320, he's a great example. And that's later in the draft. You can find the guys down there, but I just feel like the Rams, they don't have too many needs. You could say Colston Loveland here. You could say, because they have Higbee, who's not ever healthy anymore, tackle, maybe, but I think they really should prioritize. I think their offense can figure it out, right? You got Stafford, McVay, you just added Devontae Adams, and you could probably add some depth to tight end or, the offensive line later in the draft. That's what you want to do. To me, your primary need is stopping the run. So looking at these guys, we got Darius Alexander, the highest rated guy, 6'4", 310. He's got a lot of potential to be a nose guard. He's definitely got the strength to do it. Tyleik Williams is definitely looking more like the prototypical nose guard you'd want. A little bit shorter, so he's got good leverage, but 330 pounds, and I think that's denser, right? Because he's not packed into a 6'5" frame. So he is really, really short and strong. TJ Sanders, that's your Leonard Williams frame right there. Not the guy you want right now. You already have Braden Fisk. So to me, you could say Tyleik Williams is a better scheme fit, but I think Darius Alexander, go for the upside. You are trying to fill a role, but if you can get a guy that can kind of do both, you will have a filthy defensive line. Fisk, Verse, and Darius Alexander, great foundation, and definitely going to help stop against the run against the Vikings, Packers, and Eagles. Moving on to our AFC divisional round loser, the Baltimore Ravens. I'm not trying to be offensive, by the way. I mean, you guys are all the way down here, but it just is what it is, right? I mean, you guys have needs too. I would say the primary need is a wide receiver. And looking at who's available right now, I think this is a great spot to go ahead and draft Luther Burden III. I mean, he is a number one, kind of build wide receiver. You already have Zay Flowers in the slot as like your run after the catch guy. And he's got to stay there. You know what I mean? They don't use slot wide receivers the way other teams normally do, where it's like this quick passing game and you get the ball out to them in 2 seconds. The Ravens have like the most efficient offense of all time because they run the ball so much that teams have to respect it a lot more, and then they get caught more off guard by play action. Okay, makes sense. So they need guys who can make big plays, and that's what Luther Burden is excellent at. He's great after the catch. And now he's not the same route runner as Emeka Egbuka, but he can do a similar thing to Zay Flowers where you can just get him the ball in space and teams are not even close to him, right? And they didn't have Zay Flowers last year. If they had another guy that was able to do something similar to what he can do, but he's a little bit different at the same time. You get what I'm saying? They probably would have beaten the Bills, in my opinion. I mean, they were a Mark Andrews catch away from tying it, and probably sending it to overtime without Zay Flowers. So just imagine if they had two guys like this. I mean, I think something like this would even push them over the Chiefs and stuff like that. And the great part is they get to pick ahead of the Bills and Chiefs, who both need wide receivers. So I think there's a chance, the Rams might trade up or trade down with the Bills or Chiefs. And there might be some funny business going on here, but there are no trades here. So I'm going to have the Ravens taking Luther Burden III. In my opinion, a steal. I think Luther Burden looks like a monster, although the wide receivers are not going to get valued heavily. And, there's other better players at different positions. I still think this is a great draft pick. Moving on to our next team, we have the Detroit Lions, and they definitely need depth on the defense, although they had a ridiculous amount of injuries. That's probably not going to happen again. I mean, you got to be ready for it at least this time. So you're going to be looking at edge, and you're going to be looking at just linebacker in general. But to me, there's something that they have a problem with when they go against these the better quarterbacks like Jaden Daniels. I mean, their defense was destroyed, but I feel like when they didn't have the pass rush, these quarterbacks were able to get outside the pocket and make plays that their defense couldn't keep up with. But what I really like about Jalen Walker is something I saw him do a lot in film, or his highlights and stuff, is people say, oh, he's a tweener. He doesn't play enough off ball, but he doesn't get enough pass rush snaps. But you know what he does get plenty of snaps doing? Like basically spying the quarterback, because he could kind of fake a blitz, right? And then just kind of hover there. Quarterback is freaked out by whatever twist that just got run, flushes out of the pocket, and Jalen Walker was the guy to chase him down. So I think getting a guy like Jalen Walker could prepare the Lions for the Super Bowl when, say, they go up against a Lamar Jackson, something they don't typically see, or a Josh Allen, a Mahomes, or in the NFC Championship going up against a guy like Jaden Daniels. Go ahead. I'll give Jalen Hurts some respect too, and say, he can get outside the pocket with how well it's typically blocked up and all that sort of thing. And he can be dangerous outside of the pocket too. You don't want him to be comfortable. And I think actually that is another thing, the blitzing linebackers is a great way to disrupt these mobile quarterbacks like Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts. We've seen it actually from the Giants against the Commanders. Specifically, we blitzed them, and actually we're one of the best defenses against the Commanders all year. So that is going to be my pick for the Detroit Lions. He's someone you can kind of move around anywhere on the defense and give him a different role. If those injuries start to stack up, he can kind of fill the gaps as need be week to week. And he's also just a really talented player that if there are no holes, you can just rotate him in on third downs on the edge, and now you have another pass rusher. So I think this is a great pick for the Lions to make here at 28. Moving on to the Washington Commanders. They definitely need edge, in my opinion. They got to help out the defensive line. Some people are going to say running back. I don't know about that. Maybe Judkins would be a monster here, but you have Brian Robinson, who I think is just fine. It's going to say guard and corner too. Yeah, I definitely think you could look at Jahdae Barron here. But are you looking for another smaller slot corner, or do you want to get some immediate help against the run and the pass and pick up an edge rusher? So I think that's what they're going to do. Now, looking at the edge rushers available, these two guys we've been looking at for a while, very, very similar. Both about 6'2", or Nick Scorin is actually way bigger than 6'2". Excuse me, 6'4", 285. So he's that really thick build, kind of like that Cameron Jordan that we were talking about before with Shamar Stewart and Michael Williams. They're that really, really big size. But Donovan Ezraku is that much more traditional size pass rusher. But my point is that both of them are kind of very particular to a certain scheme, and it makes it very hard to know who a guy like Dan Quinn is going to take. But thinking about how he had guys like Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, and then back to his days in Atlanta, where he had oh man, what was his name? Vic Beasley, Grady Jarrett through the inside, and the former first round pick Takaris McKinley. I think Donovan Ezeraku fits a lot better of like what he's going to want. I mean, Nick Scoren does kind of compare to like a DeMarcus Ware, and he certainly could be a beast for them, helping stop against the run too. But I think Donovan Ezeraku, a really smart player, able to pick up what Dan Quinn is going to coach into him as a player. And I think this would be a very smart pick for them, falling down the board according to PFF. But I think this is more or less where he's going to go, considering the difference in upside between him and the other prospects. Donovan Ezeraku goes at 29 to the Commanders. All right, closing in on an hour here. We got 3 picks left. Talking about the Buffalo Bills. Now, to me, it's you're looking at defense, but you're also looking at wide receiver. You're saying what's the best we can get right now. Nick Scoren is there. You do have Gregory Rousseau and Joey Bosa, but I think Nick Scoren would be pretty elite with Rousseau. You'd have 2 towers to stop against the run and the pass. I mean, you wouldn't have great balance, right? If you verse 2 behemoth linemen like the Eagles and Mailata and Lane Johnson, they might do a pretty good job of stopping them, but you just never know, do you? And it's also going to say corner. And this is where I do feel like it makes sense for Jahdae Barron. They could trade up and get, they like I said, they invest into the edge group, but they really need help in the secondary. And although Jahdae Barron, some people are going to say he's a slot corner, I think with Sean McDermott's coaching, he'd be smart enough to know where to use him and where he can get away with using him on the outside. And I think that makes a lot of sense, considering that these other teams like the Ravens and the Chiefs are going to be trying to add wide receivers, try to get ahead of the curve, maybe clamp them up and force them to run the ball against you and take the ball out of the quarterback's hands, except if it's Lamar. So, Jahdae Barron goes at number 30 to the Buffalo Bills. And now we are at number 31 with the Kansas City Chiefs. And to me, they definitely need offensive and defensive line. Come on. You cannot roll into this year with Xavier Worthy potentially getting suspended. Rashee Rice is going to be suspended and in and out of court. You had to sign Hollywood Brown as your guy. And fortunately for them, there is someone right here. Emeka Egbuka, who has fallen pretty further than JSN fell. Alec Ayomanor is someone I would definitely consider too if Egbuka was gone. But Egbuka is here. He's going to be a slot wide receiver. Is he going to do the same thing as Rashee Rice? Yeah, but you might not have him for a whole year. And you know what? Maybe Egbuka will stay out of trouble and you can actually sign him to an extension. So I think this is pretty clear and obvious. Get a guy like this on the same page with Mahomes. Not only is he going to, like I said, do what Rashee Rice does, but Kelsey's going to be on his way out soon too. So all these intermediate kind of slot area, short area quickness guys that he was so used to using, that being Mahomes, he's not going to have anymore. So Emeka Egbuka goes number 31 to the Kansas City Chiefs. I get they need offensive and defensive line. I think they have confidence they can find it later. I think they desperately feel they need wide receiver. Now, finally, at number 32, we have the Philadelphia Eagles. Boo! And now I've heard rumors about them wanting to trade Dallas Goedert. I don't know if that's going to happen, but if it does, I could see them, maybe drafting Colston Loveland here as a receiving tight end and just add like another threat. Although I think Goddard's fine. I don't know why you would trade him. I feel like he's actually a really good tight end. So they brought back pretty much everyone, but lost a lot on the defensive line. And this is just way too obvious for me here. Like Nick Scoren, you saw the size profile. It's pretty crazy. You have him on the other side of Nolan Smith. That looks like your future pass rush to me. Oh, man. He can't keep getting away with it. He can't keep getting away with it. Another steal by Howie Roseman. I mean, it could have been a steal by some of these other teams, but just because the Eagles took him, he's going to be way better than that draft value. So quickly going back over our picks. At number 1, we have Cam Ward, clear and obvious. Number 2, the Browns skip out on Shedeur Sanders and take the best player in the draft, Travis Hunter. At number 3, the Giants, not allowed to trade, reluctantly stay put, and they draft Abdul Carter, who will eventually push out Kayvon Thibodeau, or you'll just run some crazy defense. And then at number 4, you have Will Campbell going to the Patriots to protect Drake May, prioritizing him over T-Mac. Number 5, Mason Graham helped patch up and secure that defensive line of theirs that they've been trying so hard to build for so long. Hopefully the new GM can get it right. And number 6, we got Genty going to the Raiders, fulfilling the Pete Carroll culture of having a beastly running back and running the ball and throwing play action. Reuniting with Geno Smith is going to be everything he wants. Number 7, we got the Jets. So if it doesn't work out with Tyler Warren, then, or not Tyler Warren, Justin Fields, then Tyler Warren will be there for your next guy with Garrett Wilson. I think having an elite wide receiver and tight end is a really, really nice thing for a quarterback to walk into. So, they have the pieces on the offensive line. They do need another right tackle, but I don't think you're getting better value than Tyler Warren at 7. T-Mac becomes Bryce Young's number 1 wide receiver, a nice big target for him to find when he's scrambling outside the pocket or just wanting to dump it off like the point guard he is. Number 9, Saints draft their favorite type of guy, Michael Williams, to be the future replacement for Cam Jordan and the future of this team. Number 10, the Bears, Ben Johnson, still obsessed with the offensive line, adds Armand Membu in case he doesn't like Braxton Jones, and completely secures and rebuilds the entire offensive line. Number 11, the 49ers are sick of Brock Purdy asking for $60 million and draft Shedeur Sanders, who somehow fell to 11, because if he doesn't go in the top 3 picks, I don't think any of the next teams, except for, even the Saints, are holding on to Derek Carr. So this is the next spot that I think you would go. And I think it's a win-win for both sides. Shedeur Sanders, criticized for his lack of upside, ends up with his best possible situation in a scheme fit where he's going to work with the best offensive coach in the NFL, in my opinion. Moving on, number 12, Dallas Cowboys, Shamar Stewart replaces DeMarcus Lawrence as the big run-defending defensive end. Number 13, the Dolphins finally do something about the offensive line and draft Kelvin Banks Jr. Number 14, Colts draft Jahad Campbell to help secure the tackling issue that they've been dealing with on the defensive side of the ball. Number 15, Falcons finally get the pass rusher they've been waiting for in James Pierce Jr. 16, Cardinals help secure their defensive line that was so bad last year with Kenneth Grant as the nose guard, and would look to have a fearsome unit for Jonathan Gannon next year. Bengals, in case Trey Hendrickson is not there, they end up drafting Mike Green, so they have a plan for the future at pass rusher. If Trey Hendrickson, does resign, you'll have 2 really good pass rushers, so that is good. Number 18, the Seahawks, if they want Sam Darnold to work, they need to protect on the inside Tyler Booker, best guard in the draft. Number 19, the Buccaneers draft Will Campbell. Carlton Davis has been gone, and now he has been replaced with another big and physical corner who's going to fit well in this scheme. Number 20, Denver Broncos should actually be kind of going in at this point, trying to win, and their defense is secure. They do need weapons when it comes to wide receiver, maybe tight end too, but best available value here for them is going to be Omari and Hampton. Most bang for your buck out of 1 pick. They do have wide receivers that can work out. Number 21, the Steelers secure their run defense and their defensive line with Derek Harmon, making a ferocious unit. 22, speedy wide receiver Matthew Golden pairs up with the running offense and play action deep shots that Justin Herbert will be throwing. Number 23, the Green Bay Packers, trying to compete with the other NFC teams that love to run the ball so much. Take Walter Nolan. Number 24, the Vikings find their long-term replacement for Harrison Smith and Malachi Starks, best safety in the draft. More than likely could be Nick Emenwari, but that's all potential. What's his name? Is Xavier Watts or Starks? Xavier Watts also in there in that discussion. Number 25, the Texans, who destroyed their offensive line, take Greg Zabel, who can play at any spot. So how is that going to miss, right? Number 26, Darius Alexander plays next to Braden Fisk as the primary run defending defensive tackle. Like I said, for the Packers, should be good against the other running teams in the NFC who all love to run the ball. They're all competing against each other in the trenches. Number 27, the Baltimore Ravens get a wide receiver to pair with Zay Flowers as the playmaker, and Luther Burden III. Love this pick right here. Might be the steal of the draft. Number 28, the Detroit Lions take Jalen Walker to be that heat-seeking QB spy, but also just a playmaking tackler on the defensive side that they can shift around depending on what defensive injuries they might be suffering, whether they need him on the edge or off the ball. They can trust that they've got someone who's got talent who might be able to do it. Number 29, Commanders, like I said, they blew up their they didn't blow it up. They made some moves on the defensive line, letting go of some guys. They got to replenish it. Donovan Ezeraku is going to be that guy for Dan Quinn as that reliable pass rusher. Number 30, Buffalo Bills finally help out their secondary and take Jahdae Barron so that they can stop getting into some strange shootouts when some games they look fine and some games they look bad. Number 31, the Chiefs, who are going to need a wide receiver desperately due to the off-the-field and legal drama with their guys who can never seem to avoid it, and get Emeka Egbuka, who is a slot wide receiver, who would be a very reliable target for Patrick Mahomes in the future, could also kind of be the replacement for Travis Kelce across the middle. And then finally at number 32, the Eagles take a very tradesy defensive end in Nick Scorn at the last pick in the draft, the opposite archetype of Nolan Smith. So this is a good pick by them. And that is going to be the whole mock draft, guys. Thank you so much for clicking on. If you clicked onto this video, you must really be looking for some out there takes because, my video is probably not pushed up to many of your guys' algorithms. If you didn't know, the more of it you look for, the more of the smaller channels you're going to find. So you really have been putting in that work, man. So I appreciate you clicking on my video. I'm sure there's some stuff you disagree with. Go ahead and tell me in the comments, what do you think is my worst pick besides the Shedeur Sanders one? I know a lot of you are going to say that, but hey, if you think it is, go ahead and just say it anyway. And then, let me know what you think my best pick is as well. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe so that you don't miss the next one. I'll have some trades in it so that, we can have some more reaction from the teams to what's going on and how the draft board is falling. And, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.